At my husband's funeral, I watched my son thank another woman, not me. He called her the one who was truly family. The guests turned to look at her, the woman in emerald silk with perfect tears and a calm smile, while I, the real wife, sat invisible in the corner. And when the lawyer later read the will and left me with nothing, that same woman smiled again. But she didn't know. I had the second will. Robert's death was sudden, too clean for the chaos he left behind. A rainy morning, failed brakes, a shattered windshield, and just like that, 40 years of marriage ended on a slippery curve downtown. They said he didn't suffer, but when I stood in front of his coffin, I couldn't decide if that was a mercy or an injustice. For years I believed our marriage, while quiet and unromantic, was built on loyalty, the kind that doesn't shine but endures. I had given up my career, my friends, even my voice, to build a home for him. At the memorial, I wore his favorite charcoal gray coat and greeted guests with a smile so practiced it no longer felt like mine. The wind bit through the fabric, but I stood straight. Robert had always cared about appearances. Even in death, I kept up the act for him. Then Daniel, our only son, walked to the podium. His voice was steady, confident, his father's reflection. He spoke about integrity, about love, about the kind of man Robert was, and then that pause, that fatal pause that split the air open. "There's someone I want to thank," he said. "Someone who stood by my father through everything. Miss Linda Mallister." The room turned to look at her. Emerald coat, black heels, flawless hair. She dabbed her eyes delicately, the perfect picture of grief. I felt the air leave my lungs. My son's words blurred, replaced by the slow, burning realization that I had just become a stranger at my own husband's farewell. That night, after the funeral, the house felt like an abandoned museum of someone else's life. Every photo frame, every scent, every carefully arranged tie in Robert's closet seemed to whisper that I had been nothing more than the curator of his image. I poured myself a glass of water, but it tasted like dust. I walked through each room as if retracing the outline of a life I once believed in. The dining table still had his chair pulled slightly back, the way he always left it, expecting me to bring him soup. The small gestures I once thought were signs of love now felt like invisible chains. I had spent 4 decades tending to his comfort, mistaking duty for devotion. I thought if I stayed patient enough, quiet enough, I would earn my place in his heart. Instead, I had been erased from his story long before the accident. The next morning I sat in the lawyer's office, my hands trembling on the polished oak table. The air smelled of paper and old promises. "Pursuant to the will signed by Mr. Robert Desmond Smith," the lawyer began, "the entirety of his estate, including all properties and financial assets, will be transferred to Ms. Linda Mallister." For a moment I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I turned to Daniel. He sat perfectly still, his gaze locked forward, as if he'd already rehearsed this moment. "You knew," I whispered. He didn't flinch. "Dad had his reasons," he said calmly. Linda understood him. She made him happy. The words sliced through me. Quiet, surgical, final. My son, my only child, the boy I had raised with sleepless nights and boundless love, now spoke of another woman as if she were his mother. When I got home, I opened Robert's closet again. His scent still lingered, cedarwood and faint cologne. I touched the sleeve of his wool jacket, the one I'd mended just last winter. I used to believe love was built on small acts like that, stitching what time had frayed. But now I saw that while I was mending fabric, he had been unraveling vows. I began searching for the truth, not because I needed to know, but because I couldn't breathe without understanding how deep the betrayal went. In the back of his desk drawer, I found letters, neatly folded, hidden under tax papers. One was from a property management firm in Nantucket, addressed to Linda Mallister. My hands shook as I read the date. 6 years ago. I had spent that summer in the hospital recovering from arthritis. Robert had told me he was away on business. I thought of every quiet night I spent alone while he worked late, every canceled trip, every polite excuse. And slowly, the puzzle rearranged itself, each lie finding its rightful place in the picture. Later that afternoon, I went to visit Giselle, our neighbor. She had always been observant, the kind of woman who noticed more than she said. "Linda?" she repeated when I mentioned her name. "Oh, Robert used to bring her to the symphony. I always thought they were a couple." I froze. "A couple?" She nodded thoughtfully. "She even helped him put up Christmas lights one year, when you were away visiting your sister. That year, I'd been bedridden, my knee swollen. Robert told me a neighborhood boy helped him. The truth hit like a slow poison. He had been rewriting our marriage in real time, crafting a new story while I was still living in the old one. 15 years. That's how long she'd been there, not in secret, but in plain sight, disguised as an assistant, a friend, a shadow that followed him home. I left Giselle's house with a numb smile, walked back across the street and stood before my front door. For the first time, I realized it was never truly mine. It was a stage, a set, a place he used until he found someone else to build his new act with. And yet, beneath all that grief, something inside me shifted, a spark, faint but alive. Betrayal had hollowed me out, but in that emptiness, something new had room to grow. For days after visiting Giselle, I moved through the house like a ghost. The floors creaked under my feet as if they too were tired of carrying secrets. The curtains still smelled faintly of his cologne, that careful blend of cedar and deceit. I thought grief would fade with time, but betrayal only sharpened with every breath. It wasn't sorrow that kept me awake anymore. It was curiosity. A quiet, burning need to know how deeply he had built his second life while I stood in the ruins of the first. I began my search the way any betrayed woman does, quietly. I went through his study, his drawers, his old emails. At first I found only the expected, work memos, invoices, letters. But then, behind a stack of annual reports, I found a small black notebook bound with a leather strap. His handwriting filled every page, names, numbers, notes about consulting transfers. The word consulting appeared so often. I could almost hear his voice saying it, the same tone he used when lying to me. That night, I took the notebook to the kitchen table, spread out my old tax records, and compared them line by line. I was once his company's financial consultant. I knew how to read between the numbers, and what I saw chilled me. Transactions labeled as external consulting support. Large sums of money paid to a name I recognized only too well. Linda Mallister. The dates lined up with the times I had been sick, recovering, or away visiting family. While I rested, he was building her fortune, brick by stolen brick. The next morning, I called an old friend, Ruth Lanier, my former colleague from the firm. She was semi-retired now, but still sharp as ever. "Ruth," I said, my voice trembling. "I think Robert used company funds to support his mistress." There was silence on the other end. Then, calmly, she said, "Bring me what you have." 2 days later, I sat in her sunlit home office, the smell of lemon tea filling the room. Ruth scrolled through digital archives, her glasses catching the screen's glow. 3 transactions, she murmured, tapping the keyboard. Each labeled as consulting payments. But the receiving company doesn't exist. She turned the screen toward me. $350,000. 3 payments spread over 5 years, each one timed right before the firm's audits. I stared at the numbers, my pulse loud in my ears. "That's fraud," I whispered. Ruth nodded. "He hid them well, but not perfectly. Maggie, this isn't just infidelity. It's embezzlement." The word sounded strange in the air, not like a legal term, but a confession. When I drove home, the autumn wind had started to blow. Leaves spun in circles along the street, caught between falling and flying. I rolled down the window and let the cold air hit my face. For the first time in months, I didn't feel weak. I felt awake. That evening, I sat down at my laptop, opened Linda's public Facebook page, and stared at the woman who had stolen my life. Her profile banner showed her on a beach at sunset. Soft hair, delicate smile, the picture of grace. Her bio read, "Grateful for love, purpose, and life's second chances. Second chances." My hands tightened on the mouse. She wasn't just living comfortably. She was living proudly, as if she had earned it. I scrolled through her photos, and there he was. Robert, sitting on her porch, holding a slice of lemon pie. The caption read, "His smile is my favorite reward." The date was 6 years ago, the same year I was bedridden with arthritis. Photo after photo appeared. Robert helping her plant roses, trimming a bonsai, toasting Christmas with wine. And then one video froze my blood. Daniel was there, barely 19, smiling awkwardly beside them as Linda laughed. "Your dad should be proud of you." It was no affair in the dark. It was a family, rehearsed and ready to replace me. I clicked save on every photo, every video. Each image became evidence, each caption another nail in the coffin of their lies. I created a folder called Proof, not because I needed revenge yet, but because I needed truth. Later that night, I called Ruth again. "You were right," I said. "It's not just betrayal. It's theft. Theft of time, of money, of dignity." She sighed softly. "What will you do?" I looked out the window. The city lights flickered faintly in the distance. "I'll do what Robert always taught me. I'll take care of everything." The next morning, I contacted a corporate fraud lawyer. Her name was Michelle Robinson, a sharp, composed woman with calm eyes and an unshakable tone. When she picked up, I said, "I have over 50 documents proving my late husband diverted company funds to his mistress. I want justice. Send me everything," she said. For days, I printed files, organized statements, labeled dates. I didn't cry once. Pain had turned into precision. When I walked into Michelle's downtown office, sunlight reflected off the glass towers like a promise of clarity. She took my folder, leafed through it silently, then looked at me and said, "We'll build your case." That night, for the first time in months, I slept without dreams. When I woke, I didn't feel like a widow anymore. I felt like a woman who had survived the storm and found the map buried beneath the wreckage. Robert's lies had built a kingdom for another woman, but I was the one who would bring it crashing down, piece by piece, truth by truth, until there was nothing left of the illusion he'd created. Because now I understood. Love may blind you, but betrayal gives you vision. The weeks that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with movement beneath the surface. By day, I was the grieving widow the neighborhood pitied. I walked slowly to the mailbox, nodded politely at the neighbors, and carried my groceries home alone. By night, I became someone else, deliberate, calculating, alive. Michelle and I met every few days. Her office always smelled faintly of paper and lavender. She had that calm, sharp kind of intelligence that didn't need to prove itself. Together, we built a case, line by line, transfer by transfer, like reconstructing a puzzle that Robert had buried under years of deceit. "Linda's name appears on every one of these accounts," Michelle said one afternoon, tracing a pen along the printed statements. "You realize, if we prove she knowingly accepted those funds, she's liable for corporate fraud." I nodded. She didn't just know. She helped him. We sent the first batch of documents to the firm's board of directors, anonymous, untraceable, from a secure address. I didn't need them to know who I was yet. I just needed them to start looking. Within days, the news broke quietly within the firm. Irregularities discovered in legacy financial records. Internal audit launched. It was only a matter of time. Linda had always loved attention. Charity galas, corporate dinners, photos where she stood beside Robert, hand lightly resting on his shoulder. But now, every camera she once invited began to turn against her. Whispers followed her through the hallways. Emails went unanswered. Clients began withdrawing. One evening, as I sat by the window sipping tea, Daniel called. His voice was tense, defensive. "Mom, you sent something to the company, didn't you?" I stayed silent. They're investigating Dad's accounts. Linda's losing her job, her reputation, everything. "Why can't you just let it go?" I laughed softly, a sound that startled even me. "Let it go? Daniel, your father stole from his company to build a life with her. She knew. She took everything that belonged to us, to you. And you want me to let it go?" He hesitated. "You sound different." "I am," I said quietly. "You'd be surprised what truth does to a person." He hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled against the windows, shaking the old glass panes. Somewhere inside me, anger and sorrow twisted together, indistinguishable. I had loved that boy more than my own life. Now he was a stranger with my husband's eyes and someone else's loyalty. But I reminded myself, revenge was not about anger. It was about balance. 2 weeks later, the board called Michelle. "We've completed the preliminary audit," they told her. "We found over $400,000 in misappropriated funds. Mallister's accounts matched the deposits exactly. We're filing charges." When she told me, I didn't smile. I just felt a quiet, steady relief. The kind that doesn't celebrate, only exhales. But the storm wasn't over. Linda was clever. She hired her own lawyers, claimed ignorance, said Robert had managed everything. She played the victim perfectly, soft-spoken, sorrowful, trembling in interviews. "I didn't know," she told reporters. "He told me it was consulting work." The court of public opinion hesitated. Sympathy, once turned toward me, began to split. Michelle warned me, "She's manipulating the narrative. If you stay silent, she'll control the story." That night, I did something I never thought I would. I spoke publicly. I wrote an open letter, simple and factual. No emotion, no accusation, just truth. I attached copies of the signed checks, his notes from the Black Journal, and an affidavit from Ruth verifying the fraudulent transactions. I sent it to the press. By morning, it was everywhere. Widow exposes late husband's mistress in corporate scandal. Reporters swarmed the firm. Investors demanded accountability. Linda's name was plastered across headlines, no longer followed by admiration but by contempt. When I saw her photo on the news, mascara running, eyes red, clutching her lawyer's arm, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something colder, sharper. Closure. But revenge has a way of spilling beyond what you plan. One evening, I found Daniel sitting on my porch. He looked thinner, older. "She's moving out," he said quietly. "Linda, her life's falling apart. She tried to call you." "She shouldn't," I said. He looked at me then, eyes full of something like regret. "You destroyed her." I set my cup down slowly. "No, Daniel. She destroyed herself. I just turned on the light." He didn't respond. When he left, I stood by the window watching him drive away. The taillights disappeared into the dark, and I realized something. In winning this war, I had lost the last piece of my old life. But maybe that was the point. The trial began 3 months later. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and old air. Linda sat across from me in a navy suit, hair pulled back, face pale. When the prosecutor presented the documents, the transactions, the property deeds, the letters, she lowered her head. The verdict was clear. Guilty of complicity in corporate fraud. 2 years probation, heavy fines, and a permanent mark on her record. When it was over, I walked out into the sunlight. Reporters called my name, microphones thrust forward. I ignored them. Justice didn't need an audience. Michelle met me on the courthouse steps. "It's done," she said softly. "You can move on now, move on." The words sounded both foreign and fragile. That evening, I drove to the cliffside overlooking the bay, the same place Robert used to take Linda, according to his emails. The wind was strong, whipping my hair across my face. I took out the black notebook, the one that had started it all, and opened it to the last page. There, in his careful handwriting, he had written, "If anything happens to me, Linda knows what to do." I smiled faintly. "Not this time," I whispered. I tore the page out, set it on fire, and watched as the ashes scattered into the sea. When I got home, I stood in front of the mirror. For the first time, I didn't see a widow. I saw a woman rebuilt from her own wreckage. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase. Just clothes, a notebook, and a single photo. Daniel at 10 years old, smiling with a missing tooth. I left the house keys on the counter. The house had been Robert's stage, not mine. my story would start elsewhere. As I locked the door for the last time, I realized something profound. Revenge had not healed me. Justice hadn't restored what I'd lost, but it had done something better. It had given me back myself, and for the first time in decades, that was enough. The bus hummed quietly as it left the city behind. Through the window, I watched the skyline shrink, glass and steel fading into fields and open sky. The morning light spilled gently across the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel harsh. It felt honest. I had no destination in particular, just a direction, north toward the coast. Somewhere far enough from the echoes of my old life, the house, the neighbors, the whispers. All of it was behind me now, sealed like a story I had finally finished reading. For years, I had built my existence around others, first Robert, then Daniel, then the illusion of the woman I was supposed to be. The careful wife, the patient mother, the silent partner. But silence had never protected me. It had only erased me. At a small coastal town called Harrow's Point, I stepped off the bus. The air was crisp, smelling faintly of salt and pine. Seagulls cried somewhere in the distance. I walked down to the shore and stood at the edge of the waves. My reflection shimmered against the water. Older, sharper, alive. For the first time. I wasn't looking for anyone behind me. I rented a small cottage near the lighthouse. White walls, creaking floors, a garden overrun with wildflowers. The owner, an elderly woman named Elise, handed me the keys with a kind smile. "It's quiet here," she said. "Good," I replied. "That's what I need." Days passed gently. I began painting again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. My hands trembled at first, uncertain after years of stillness, but the colors came back to me slowly. Blues, golds, rust reds, shades of grief, of rebirth. One evening I received a letter. The handwriting was familiar. Daniel. He wrote simply, "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. About truth. You were right. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I hope you're okay." I folded the letter and placed it on the table beside a half-finished canvas. I didn't cry. I just smiled. A small, steady smile that felt real. The sun began to set outside, casting the room in gold. I walked to the porch and watched the sea glow like molten glass. Somewhere out there, the ashes of Robert's final lie still drifted on the tide. I wasn't angry anymore. Not even sad. Just done. Some endings aren't about revenge or justice. They're about quiet freedom. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to fix what was never yours to repair. I took a deep breath, let the wind fill my lungs, and whispered to no one in particular. I made it. And for the first time, the silence that answered me didn't feel empty. It felt like peace.